Hello, hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are starting Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. But first, reading updates. I read a graphic novel yesterday in its entirety. I didn't think that I was going to be reading anything because of the 12-hour chaos, but I did read something. It was a graphic novel. It's called Firebugs, and I am terrible, and I forgot who the author is. But it is about this couple in Germany and the like 3 seasons of their relationship. So we start and they are about 1 year into the relationship and they are living together, everything like that. And it's just going through like spring, summer, and I think fall. Um, and it's just showcasing like the end and like the fragments of relationships. And it's very interesting. The art style is very different than what I'm used to, and even the text was more like handwritten feeling. And there was a couple times when a character would like talk over somebody, and so there was like that really cool like blend that you could do with the same style that made it seem so organic, but it was really nice. Um, but it was good. Yeah, I just needed to catch up on my reading. I've now caught up. I've read 54 books this year so far, and I looked up like best graphic novels of 2024, and that one came up, and I was like, yes. And I didn't even really look to see what it was. I knew that it was about a crumbling like relationship, and I was like, perfect. And then I also grabbed another one which I haven't received yet, called Okinawa. So I'm excited for that one too. And the cover looks beautiful. So when I get that one in, I'll show it because it just like the color palette seems really, really nice. Seems really, really nice. Um, and that's it. That's all the reading updates I have. So yeah, I think that's all of the updates that I have. Shall we? Shall we? Shall we? Today we're starting a new book, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. It is a chonker. Depending on like translations, it's over 800 pages. So we'll be here for a while. We'll be here for a bit, and it will be the longest book that we've read here. The beating out Don Quixote, which was like 600 something. So cool. Cool, cool, cool. I did pull up the Wikipedia page just to give like very minimal context. There are spoilers on the rest of the page, so I'm not going to read that part, but I can read just a little snippet. It was originally published in 1878. And here we go. Anna Karenina is a novel by the Russian author Leo Tolstoy, first published in book form in 1878, considered to be one of the greatest works of literature ever written. Tolstoy himself called it his first true novel. It was initially released in serial installments from 1875 to 1877, all but the last part appearing in the periodical The Russian Messenger. When William Faulkner was asked to list what he thought were the 3 greatest novels, he replied, Anna Karenina, Anna Karenina, and Anna Karenina. So, that's exciting. That's fun. And yeah, let's do it. This is a first read for me. I have not read it. I have not seen any adaptations. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. All reactions that you get from me are gonna be real. And any statements that I'm like, I wonder if they're not spoilery wonders. They're not, I know what's gonna happen and I'm gonna lead you into this. I truly do wonder. I truly am wondering this. Exactly. No spoilers. People used to love serializing. Yes. And with a book of this hefty, chonky size, I feel like serializing is probably the best way to digest it because if you just like throw 860 something pages at somebody, they aren't gonna want, you know? But if you're getting it in like little like 200 page chunks or something, or like 150 page chunks, like whatever, then you're like, okay, I can do this. I can read this. It's like when you're watching a show and you're so used to like watching like hour-long shows, and then you get to like the 30-minute show and you're like, oh, this is nothing. It's kind of like that. But not really at all. All right, so there are 8 parts, and also traditionally, when the book is like compiled, it's in 2 volumes. So we are just going. We're just going full speed ahead, yeah? So let's have a sip. Let's get cozy, and let's do it. Part 1, Chapter 1. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Everything here in confusion in the Oblonsky's house. The wife had discovered that the husband was carrying on an intrigue with a French girl who had been a governess in their family, and she had announced to her husband that she could not go on living in the same house with him. This position of affairs had now lasted 3 days, and not only the husband and wife themselves, but all the members of their family and household were painfully conscious of it. Every person in the house felt that there was no sense in their living together, and that the stray people brought together by chance in any inn had more in common with one another than they, the members of the family and household of the Oblonskys. The wife did not leave her own room. The husband had not been at home for 3 days. The children ran wild all over the house. The English governess quarreled with the housekeeper and wrote to a friend asking her to look out for a new situation for her. The man cook had walked off the day before just at dinner time. The kitchen maid and the coachman had given warning. 3 days after the quarrel, Prince Stepan Arkadievich Oblonsky, Steva, as he was called in the fashionable world, woke up at his usual hour, that is, at 8 o'clock in the morning, not in his wife's bedroom, but on the leather-covered sofa in his study. He turned over his stout, well-cared-for person on the springy sofa, as though he would sink into a long sleep again. He vigorously embraced the pillow on the other side and buried his face in it. But all at once he jumped up and sat up on the sofa and opened his eyes. Yes, yes, how was it now? He thought, going over his dream. Now, how was it? To be sure, Alabin was having dinner at the Darmstadt. No, not Darmstadt, but something American. Yes, but then Darmstadt was in America. Yes, Alban was giving a dinner on glass tables, and the tables sang Il mio tesoro. Not Il mio tesoro, though, but something better. And there were some sort of little decanters on the table, and there were women, too, he remembered. Stepan Arkadyevich's eyes twinkled happily, and he pondered with a smile. Yes, it was nice, very nice. There was a great deal more that was delightful. Only there's no putting it into words, or even expressing it in one's thoughts awake. And noticing a gleam of light peeping in beside one of the serge curtains, he cheerfully dropped his feet over the edge of the sofa and felt about them for his slippers, a present on his last birthday, worked for him by his wife on gold-colored morocco. And, as he had done every day for the last 9 years, he stretched out his hand, without getting up, towards the place where his dressing gown always hung in his bedroom. And thereupon he suddenly remembered that he was not sleeping in his wife's room, but in his study. And why? The smile vanished from his face. He knitted his brows. Ah, oh, he muttered, recalling everything that had happened. And again, every detail of his quarrel with his wife was present to his imagination, all the hopelessness of his position, and worst of all, his own fault. Yes, she won't forgive me, and she can't forgive me. And the most awful thing about it is that it's all my fault. All my fault, though I'm not to blame. That's the point of the whole situation, he reflected. Oh, he kept repeating in despair as he remembered the acutely painful sensations caused him by this quarrel. Most unpleasant of all was the first minute when, on coming, happy and good-humored from the theater, with a huge pear in his hand for his wife, he had not found his wife in the drawing-room. To his surprise, he had not found her in the study either, and saw her at last in her bedroom, with the unlucky letter that revealed everything in her head. She, his dolly, forever fussing and worrying over household details, and limited in her ideas, as he considered, was sitting perfectly still, with the letter in her hand, looking at him with an expression of horror, despair, and indignation. "What's this? This?" she said, pointing to the letter. And at his recollection, Stepan Arkadyevitch, as is so often the case, was not so much annoyed at the fact itself as at the way in which he had met his wife's words. There happened to him at that instant what does happen to people when they are unexpectedly caught in something very disgraceful. He did not succeed in adapting his face to the position in which he was placed towards his wife by the discovery of his fault. Instead of being hurt, denying, defending himself, begging forgiveness, instead of remaining indifferent even, anything would have been better than what he did do. His face utterly, involuntarily, reflex spinal action, reflected Stepan Arkadyevitch, who was fond of physiology, utterly involuntarily assumed his habitual, good-humored, and therefore idiotic smile. This idiotic smile he could not forgive himself. Catching sight of that smile, Dolly shuddered as though at physical pain, broke out with her characteristic heat into a flood of cruel words, and rushed out of the room. Since then, she had refused to see her husband. It's that idiotic smile that's to blame for it all, thought Stepan Arkadyevitch. But what's to be done? What's to be done? He said to himself in despair, and found no answer. End of chapter 1. What a start. What a start. Love the first line. All happy families are happy in the same way, but all unhappy families are unhappy in different ways. That's cool. And we are introduced to one of our main characters, maybe. We're introduced to a character, Stepan Arkadyevitch, and he has just woken up in the morning and reaches for his robe where it usually is hanging, and realizes that he's not in bed. He's not in his bed. He's actually on the leather sofa in his study because he came home from the theater to his wife, who had a letter, and was like, "What is this?" And instead of being able to explain himself or apologize or anything like that, he just has his dopey little smile, which is his default, and thus a fractured house. And so he's been sleeping in the study, and we also get like remembrances of that in-between time of when you're still waking up, not really knowing if you're awake or not, of the dream that he had previously. I like this. I'm loving the writing style. I think this is gonna be good. Tolstoy knows how to hit the ground running. Exactly. Yeah. And I'm ready. I'm ready to run with you, Tolstoy, and I don't like running. That's how you know it's good. Chapter 2. Stepan Arkadyevich was a truthful man in his relationship with himself. He was incapable of deceiving himself and persuading himself that he repented of his conduct. He could not, at this date, repent of the fact that he, a handsome, susceptible man of 34, was not in love with his wife, the mother of 5 living and 2 dead children, and only a year younger than himself. All he repented of was that he had not succeeded better in hiding it from his wife. But he felt all the difficulty of his position and was sorry for his wife, his children, and himself. Possibly he might have managed to conceal his sins better from his wife if he had anticipated that the knowledge of them would have had such an effect on her. He had never clearly thought of the subject, but he had vaguely conceived that his wife must long ago have suspected him of being unfaithful to her, and shut her eyes to the fact. He had even supposed that she, a worn-out woman no longer young or good-looking, and in no way remarkable or interesting, merely a good mother, ought, from a sense of fairness, to take an indulgent view. It had turned out quite the other way. It's so awful. Oh dear. Oh dear. Awful, Stepan Arkadyevich kept repeating to himself, and he could think of nothing to be done. And how well things are going up till now, how well we got on. She was contented and happy in her children. I never interfered with her in anything. I let her manage the children and the house just as she liked. It's true, it's bad her having been a governess in our house. That's bad. That's something common, vulgar, in flirting with one's governess. But what a governess. He vividly recalled the roguish black eyes of Mademoiselle Roland and her smile. But after all, while she was in the house, I kept myself in hand. And the worst of it all is that she's already... It seems as if ill luck would have it so. Ugh, but what? What is to be done? There was no solution, but that universal solution which life gives to all questions, even the most complex and insoluble. The answer is, one must live in the needs of the day. That is, forget oneself. To forget himself in sleep was impossible now, at least till nighttime. He could not go back now to the music sung by the decanter woman. So, he must forget himself in the dream of daily life. Then we shall see, Stepan Arkadyevich said to himself, and getting up, he put on a gray dressing gown lined with blue silk, tied the tassels in a knot, and, drawing a deep breath of air into his broad, bare chest, he walked to the window with his usual confident step, turning out his feet that carried his full frame so easily. He pulled up the blind and rang the bell loudly. It was at once answered by the appearance of an old friend, his valet, Matvey, carrying his clothes, his boots, and a telegram. Matvey was followed by the barber with all the necessaries for shaving. "Are there any papers from the office?" asked Stepan Arkadyevich, taking the telegram and seating himself at the looking-glass. "On the table," replied Matvey, glancing with inquiring sympathy at his master, and, after a short pause, he added with a sly smile, "They've sent from the carriage jobbers." Stepan Arkadyevich made no reply. He merely glanced at Matvey in the looking-glass. In the glance in which their eyes met in the looking-glass, it was clear that they understood one another. Stepan Arkadyevitch's eyes said, "Why do you tell me that?" Don't you know? Matvey put his hands in his jacket pockets, thrust out one leg, and gazed silently, good-humoredly, with a faint smile at his master. I told them to come on Sunday, and till then not to trouble you or themselves for nothing, he said. He had obviously prepared the sentence beforehand. Stepan Arkadyevitch saw Matvey wanted to make a joke and attract attention to himself. Tearing open the telegram, he read it through, guessing at the words, misspelt as they always are in telegrams, and his face brightened. Matvey, my sister Anna Arkadyevitch will be here tomorrow, he said, checking for a minute the sleek, plump hand of the barber, cutting a pink path through his long, curly whiskers. Thank God, said Matvey, showing by his response that he, like his master, realized the significance of this arrival. That is, that Anna Arkadyevna, the sister he was so fond of, might bring about a reconciliation between husband and wife. Alone, or with her husband? Inquired Matvey. Stepan Arkadyevitch could not answer, as the barber was at work on his upper lip, and he raised one finger. Matvey nodded at the looking-glass. Alone. Is the room to be rightly upstairs? Inform Darya Alexandrovna, where she orders. Darya Alexandrovna, Matvey repeated as though in doubt. Yes, inform her. Here, take the telegram, give it to her, and then do what she tells you. You want to try it on? Matvey understood, but he only said, Yes, sir. Stepan Arkadyevitch was already washed and combed and ready to be dressed when Matvey, stepping deliberately in his creaky boots, came back into the room with the telegram in his hand. The barber had gone. Darya Alexandrovna told me to inform you that she is going away. Let him do, that is you, as he likes, he said, laughing, only with his eyes and putting his hands in his pockets. He watched his master, with his head on one side. Stepan Arkadyevitch was silent a minute. Then a good-humored and rather pitiful smile showed itself on his handsome face. Eh, Matvey? He said, shaking his head. It's all right, sir. She will come round, said Matvey. Come round? Yes, sir. Do you think so? Who's there? Asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, hearing the rustle of a woman's dress at the door. It's I, said a firm, pleasant woman's voice, and the stern, pock-marked face of Matrona Filimonovna, the nurse, was thrust in at the door. Well, what is it, Matrona? Queried Stepan Arkadyevitch, going up to her at the door. Although Stepan was completely in the wrong as regards his wife, and was conscious of this himself, also everyone in the house, even the nurse, Darya Alexandrovna, chief ally, was on his side. Well, what now? He asked, disconsolately. Go to her, sir. Own your fault again. Maybe God will aid you. She is suffering so. It's sad to see her. And besides, everything in the house is topsy-turvy. You must have pity, sir, on the children. Beg her forgiveness, sir. There's no help for it. One must take the consequences. But she won't see me. You do your part. God is merciful. Pray to God. Sir, pray to God. Come, that'll do. You can go, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, blushing suddenly. Well now, do dress me. He turned to Matvey and threw his dressing-gown decisively. Matvey was already holding up the shirt like a horse's collar, and, blowing off some invisible speck, he slipped it with obvious pleasure over the well-groomed body of his master. End of chapter 2. Why do we need to say everybody's full name every single time we say their name? Okay. Chapter 2, Stepan is now awake and he's getting ready, and Matvey comes in and is shaving him, getting him dressed, all of these things, and also brings a telegram. And the telegram is from Stepan's sister, Anna, and Anna is coming on her way. And they both, don't say this out loud, but both individually think that this is a great thing, because Anna coming is going to mean that the marriage between Stepan and his wife is going to be, fixed, solved. We'll see. We'll see. Okay. Chapter 3. When he was dressed, Stepan Arkadyevitch sprinkled some scent on himself, pulled down his shirt cuffs, distributed into his pockets his cigarettes, pocketbook, matches, and watch with its double chain and seals, and shaking out his handkerchief, feeling himself clean, fragrant, healthy, and physically at ease, in spite of his unhappiness, he walked with a slight swing on each leg into the dining room, where coffee was already waiting for him, and beside the coffee, letters and papers from the office. He read the letters. One was very unpleasant, but a merchant who was buying a forest on his wife's property. To sell this forest was absolutely essential, but at present, until he was reconciled with his wife, the subject could not be discussed. The most unpleasant thing of all was that his pecuniary interests should in this way enter into the question of his reconciliation with his wife. And the idea that he might be led on by his interests, that he might seek a reconciliation with his wife on account of the sale of the forest, that idea hurt him. When he had finished his letters, Stepan Arkadyevitch moved the office papers close to him, rapidly looked through 2 pieces of business, made a few notes with a big pencil, and pushing away the papers, turned to his coffee. As he sipped his coffee, he opened a still damp morning paper and began to read it. Stepan Arkadyevitch took in and read a liberal paper, not an extreme one, but one advocating the views held by the majority. And in spite of the fact that science, art, and politics had no special interest for him, he firmly held those views on all these subjects which were held by the majority and by his paper. And he only changed them when the majority changed them, or, more strictly speaking, he did not change them, but they imperceptibly changed of themselves within him. Stepan Arkadyevitch had not chosen his political opinions or his views. These political opinions and views had come to him of themselves, just as he did not choose the shapes of his hat and coat, but simply took those that were being worn. And for him, living in a certain society, owing to the need, ordinarily developed at years of discretion, for some degree of mental activity, to have views was just as indispensable as to have a hat. If there was a reason for his preferring liberal to conservative views, which were held also by many of his circle, it arose not from his considering liberalism more rational, but from its being in closer accordance with his manner of life. The Liberal Party said that in Russia everything is wrong, and certainly Stepan Arkadyevitch had many debts and was decidedly short of money. The Liberal Party said that marriage is an institution quite out of date, and that it needs reconstruction. And family life certainly afforded Stepan Arkadyevitch little gratitude, and forced him into lying and hypocrisy, which was so repulsive to his nature. The Liberal Party said, or rather allowed it to be understood, that religion is only a curb to keep in check the barbarous classes of the people, and Stepan Arkadyevitch could not get through even a short service without his legs aching from standing up, and could never make out what was the object of all the terrible and high-flown language about another world when life might be so very amusing in this world. And with all this, Stepan Arkadyevitch, who liked a joke, was fond of puzzling a plain man by saying that if he prided himself on his origin, he ought not to stop at Rurik and disown the first founder of his family, the monkey. And so liberalism had become a habit of Stepan Arkadyevitch, and he liked his newspaper, and he did his cigar after dinner for the slight fog it diffused in his brain. He read the leading article, in which it was maintained that it was quite senseless in our day to raise an outcry that radicalism was threatening to swallow up all conservative elements, and that the government ought to take measures to crush the revolutionary hydra, that, on the contrary, in our opinion, the danger lies not in the fantastic revolutionary hydra, but in the obstinacy of traditionalism clogging progress, etc., etc. He read another article, too, a financial one, which alluded to Bentham and Mill, and dropped some innuendos reflecting on the ministry. With his characteristic quick-wittedness, he caught the drift of each innuendo, divined whence it came, at whom and on what ground it was aimed, and that afforded him, as it always did, a certain satisfaction. But today, that satisfaction was embittered by Matrona Filimonovna's advice, and the unsatisfactory state of the household. He read, too, that Count Beast was rumored to have left for Wiesbaden, and that one need have no more gray hair, and of the sale of a light carriage, and of a young person seeking a situation. But these items of information did not give him, as usual, a quiet, ironical gratification. Having finished the paper, a second cup of coffee, and a roll and butter, he got up, shaking the crumbs of the roll of his waistcoat, and squaring his broad chest, he smiled joyously. Not because there was anything particularly agreeable in his mind. The joyous smile was evoked by a good digestion. But this joyous smile at once recalled everything to him, and he grew thoughtful. Two childish voices, Stepan Arkadyevitch recognized the voices of Grisha, his youngest boy, and Tanya, his eldest girl, were heard outside the door. They were carrying something, and dropped it. "I told you not to sit passenger on the roof," said the little girl, in English. "There, pick them up." Everything's in confusion, thought Stepan Arkadyevitch. There are the children running about by themselves, and going to the door, he called them. They threw down the box and represented a train, and came in to their father. The little girl, her father's favorite, ran up boldly, embraced him, and hung laughingly on his neck, enjoying, as she always did, the smell of scent that came from his whiskers. At last, the little girl kissed his face, which was flushed from his stooping posture, and beamed with tenderness, loosed her hands, and was about to run away again. But her father held her back. "How is Mamma?" he asked, passing his hand over his daughter's smooth, soft little neck. "Good morning," he said, smiling to the boy who had come up to greet him. He was conscious that he loved the boy less, and always tried to be fair, but the boy felt it, and did not respond with a smile to his father's chilly smile. "Mamma, she is up," answered the girl. Stepan Arkadyevitch sighed. "That means she's not slept again all night," he thought. "Well, is she cheerful?" The little girl knew that there was a quarrel between her father and mother, and that her mother could not be cheerful, and that her father must be aware of this, and that he was pretending when he asked about it so lightly. And she blushed for her father. He at once perceived it, and blushed too. "I don't know," she said. "She did not say we must do our lessons, but she said we were to go for a walk with Mrs. Hoole to Grandmamma's." "Well, go, Tanya, my dear. Oh, wait a minute, though," he said, still holding her and stroking her soft little hand. He took off the mantelpiece where he had put it yesterday, a little box of sweets and gave her two, picking out her favorites, a chocolate and a fondant. For Grisha, said the little girl, pointing to the chocolate. Yes, yes, and still stroking her shoulder, he kissed her on the roots of her hair and neck and let her go. The carriage is ready, said Matvey, but there's something to see you in the petition. Been here long? Asked Stepan Arkadyevitch. Half an hour. How many times have I told you to tell me at once? One must let you drink your coffee, in peace at least, said Matvey, in the affectionately gruff tone with which it was impossible to be angry. Well, show the person up at once, said Oblonsky, frowning with vexation. The petitioner, the widow of a staff captain, Karenina, came with a request, impossible and unreasonable. But Stepan Arkadyevitch, as he generally did, made her sit down, heard her to the end attentively without interrupting her, and gave her detailed advice as to how and to whom to apply, and even wrote her, in his large, sprawling, good and legible hand, a confident and fluent little note to a personage who might be of use to her. Having got rid of the staff captain's widow, Stepan Arkadyevitch took his hat and stopped to recollect whether he had forgotten anything. It appeared that he had forgotten nothing except what he wanted to forget. His wife. Ah, yes. He bowed his head, and his handsome face assumed a harassed expression. To go, or not to go, he said to himself, and an inner voice told him he must not go, that nothing could come of it but falsity, that to amend, to set right their relation was impossible, because it was impossible to make her attractive again and able to inspire love, or to make him an old man, not susceptible to love. Except deceit and lying, nothing could come of it now, and deceit and lying were opposed to his nature. It must be some time, though. It can't go on like this, he said, trying to give himself courage. He squared his chest, took out a cigarette, took 2 whiffs at it, flung it into a mother-of-pearl ashtray, and with rapid steps walked through the drawing room and opened the other door into his wife's bedroom. End of chapter 3. Okay, chapter 3, he is now sitting down to coffee, still waking up, and he hears his 2 eldest kids outside, and they drop something. His eldest daughter, Tanya, and his eldest son, which I can't remember his name, which I guess is fitting because he also doesn't really like his son, or he loves his son less than his daughter, and it shows. The kid knows. But they come in, they say good morning, and he's like, oh, how's mother today? And the kids know. The kids know that they're fighting, and the kids also know that the dad knows that there's no way that mama can be happy. So there's that weird, like, awkward moment, and so he, like, sends them on their way, but just gives chocolate to the daughter and not to the son. Favoritism. Blatant favoritism. But then Matvey comes in and is like, hey, you have a visitor, there's a carriage here, and he talks with a woman, like, writes what does he write? He writes something. I'm trying to think of a little note, I guess. It just says a little note, so that's what we're going with. A little note. And then he's like, all right, well, I think that's it. Oh, wait, there's one thing I'm forgetting, and I'm intentionally forgetting, and it's my wife. And he's like, well, I guess I have to go and, like, talk with her, but there's really nothing that can be done because there's no way that she's gonna get younger and prettier, which means there's no way that, like, we can last, and there's no way that I'm gonna get, like, older immediately to the point of where, like, love is no longer gonna be something that I'm interested in. So I guess we'll just go with deceit and lies. He's not a bad person, but he is a douche. Yeah, yeah. He's not he's a flawed character, and I enjoy that. And he's also self-aware in his flaws, and I also think that that's pretty cool. Chapter 4. Daria Alexandrovna, in a dressing jacket and with her now scanty, once luxuriant and beautiful hair fastened up with hairpins at the nape of her neck, with a sunken, thin face and large, startled eyes, which looked prominent from the thinness of her face, was standing among a litter of all sorts of things scattered all over the room, before an open bureau from which she was taking something. Hearing her husband's steps, she stopped, looking towards the door and trying assiduously to give her features a severe and contemptuous expression. She felt she was afraid of him, and afraid of the coming interview. She was just attempting to do what she had attempted to do 10 times already in these last 3 days, to sort out the children's things and her own, so as to take them to her mother's. And again, she could not bring herself to do this. But now again, as each time before, she kept saying to herself that things cannot go on like this, that she must take some step to punish him, put him to shame, avenge on him some little part at least of the suffering he had caused her. She still continued to tell herself that she should leave him, but she was conscious that this was impossible. It was impossible because she could not get out of the habit of regarding him as her husband and loving him. Besides this, she realized that if even here in her own house she could hardly manage to look after her 5 children properly, they would be still worse off where she was going with them all. As it was, even in the course of these 3 days, the youngest was unwell from being given unwholesome soup, and the others had almost gone without their dinner the day before. She was conscious that it was impossible to go away, but, cheating herself, she went on all the same, sorting out her things and pretending she was going. Seeing her husband, she dropped her hands into the drawer of the bureau as though looking for something, and only looked round at him when he had come quite up to her. But her face, to which she tried to give a severe and resolute expression, betrayed bewilderment and suffering. "Dolly," he said, in a subdued and timid voice. He bent his head towards his shoulder and tried to look pitiful and humble, but for all that he was radiant with freshness and health. In a rapid glance she scanned his figure that beamed with health and freshness. Yes, he is happy and content, she thought, while and that disgusting good nature, which everyone likes him for and praises, I hate that good nature of his, she thought. Her mouth stiffened. The muscles of her cheek contracted on the right side of her pale, nervous face. "What do you want?" she said in a rapid, deep, unnatural voice. "Dolly," he repeated, with a quiver in his voice. "Anna is coming today." "Well, what is that to me? I can't see her," she cried. "But you must, really, Dolly. Go away, go away, go away!" she shrieked, not looking at him, as though this shriek were called up by physical pain. Stepan Arkadyevitch could be calm when he thought of his wife. He could hope that she would come round, as Matvey expressed it, and could quietly go on reading his paper and drinking his coffee. But when he saw her tortured, suffering face, heard the tone of her voice, submissive to fate and full of despair, there was a catch in his breath and a lump in his throat, and his eyes began to shine with tears. My God, what have I done? Dolly, for God's sake, you know... He could not go on. There was a sob in his throat. She shut the bureau with a slam and glanced at him. "Dolly, what can I say? One thing, forgive." Remember, cannot 9 years of my life atone for an instant? She dropped her eyes and listened, expecting what he would say, as it were beseeching him in some way or other to make her believe differently. Instant of passion, he said, and would have gone on, but at that word, as, a, as at a pang of physical pain, her lips stiffened again, and again the muscles of her right cheek worked. Go away. Go out of the room, she shrieked still more shrilly, and don't talk to me of your passion and your loathsomeness. She tried to go out, but tottered, and clung to the back of a chair to support herself. Her face relaxed, his lips swelled, his eyes were swimming with tears. Dolly, he said, sobbing now, for mercy's sake, think of the children. They are not to blame. I am to blame, and punish me. Make me expiate my fault. Anything I can do, I am ready to do anything. I am to blame. No words can express how much I am to blame. But Dolly, forgive me. She sat down. He listened to her hard, heavy breathing, and he was unutterably sorry for her. She tried several times to begin to speak, but could not. He waited. You remember the children, Steva, to play with them, but I remember them, and know that this means their ruin, she said. Obviously one of the phrases she had more than once repeated to herself in the course of the last few days. She had called him Steva, and he glanced at her with gratitude and moved to take her hand, but she drew back from him with aversion. I think of the children, and for that reason I would do anything in the world to save them, but I don't myself know how to save them. By taking them away from their father, or by leaving them with a vicious father. Yes, a vicious father. Tell me, after what has happened, can we live together? Is that possible? Tell me, eh? Is it possible? She repeated, raising her voice. After my husband, the father of my children, enters into a love affair with his own children's governess? But what could I do? What could I do? He kept saying in a pitiful voice, not knowing what he was saying as his head sank lower and lower. You are loathsome to me. Repulsive, she shrieked, getting more and more heated. Your tears mean nothing. You have never loved me. You have neither heart nor honorable feeling. You are hateful to me, disgusting, a stranger, yes, a complete stranger. With a pain and wrath, she uttered the word so terrible to herself. Stranger. He looked at her, and the fury expressed in her face alarmed and amazed him. He did not understand how his pity for her exasperated her. She saw in him sympathy for her, but not love. No, she hates me. She will not forgive me, he thought. It is awful, awful, he said. At that moment, in the next room, a child began to cry. Probably it had fallen down. Darya Alexandrovna listened, and her face suddenly softened. She seemed to be pulling herself together for a few seconds, as though she did not know where she was and what she was doing, and getting up rapidly, she moved towards the door. Well, she loves my children, he thought, noticing the change of her face at the child's cry. My child. How can she hate me? Dolly, one more word, he said, following her. If you come near me, I will call the servants, the children. They may all know you are a scoundrel. I am going away at once, and you may live here with your mistress. And she went out, slamming the door. Stepan Arkadyevitch sighed, wiped his face, and with a subdued tread walked out of the room. Matvey says she will come round. But how? I don't see the least chance of it. How terrible it is, and how vulgarly she shouted, he said to himself, remembering her shriek and the words scoundrel and mistress. And very likely the maids were listening. Horribly vulgar. Horrible. Stepan Arkadyevitch stood a few seconds alone, wiped his face, squared his chest, and walked out of the room. It was Friday, and in the dining room the German watchmaker was winding up the clock. Stepan Arkadyevitch remembered his joke about his punctual, bald watchmaker, that the German was wound up for a whole lifetime himself to wind up watches, and he smiled. Stepan Arkadyevitch was fond of a joke. And maybe she will come round. That's a good expression. Come round, he thought. I must repeat that. Matvey, he shouted, arrange everything with Darya in the sitting room for Anna Arkadyevna, he said to Matvey when he came in. Yes, sir. Stepan Arkadyevitch put on his fur coat and went out onto the steps. You won't dine at home? Said Matvey, seeing him off. That's as it happens. But here's for the housekeeping, he said, taking 10 rubles from his pocketbook. That'll be enough. Enough or not enough, we must make it do, said Matvey, slamming the carriage door and stepping back onto the steps. Darya Alexandrovna, meanwhile, having pacified the child and knowing from the sound of the carriage that he had gone off, went back again to her room. It was her solitary refuge from the household cares which crowded upon her directly she went out from it. Even now, in the short time she had been in the nursery, the English governess and Matrona Filimonovna had succeeded in putting several questions to her which did not admit of delay, and which only she could answer. What were the children to put on for their walk? Should they have any milk? Should not a new cook be sent for? Let me alone, she said, and going back to her bedroom, she sat down in the same place as she had sat when talking to her husband, clasping tightly her thin hands with the rings that slipped down on her bony fingers and fell to going over in her memory all the conversation. He has gone. But has he broken it off with her? She thought. Can it be he sees her? Why didn't I ask him? No, reconciliation is impossible. Even if we remain in the same house, we are strangers forever. She repeated again, with special significance, the word so dreadful to her. And how I loved him. My God, how I loved him. How I loved him. And now don't I love him? Don't I love him more than before? The most horrible thing is, she began, but did not finish her thought, because Matrona Filimonovna put her head in at the door. Let us send for my brother, she said. He can get a dinner anyway, or we shall have the children getting nothing to eat till 6 again, like yesterday. Very well. I will come directly and see about it. But did you send for some new milk? And Darya Alexandrovna plunged into the duties of the day and drowned her grief in them for a time. End of chapter 4. Okay, so we have Stepan and Darya talking it out, confronting what has happened, which they didn't do yet, which is wild to me. But they just slept on it and they went to bed angry. But now they are talking about it, and he in his head is still like, I don't understand why she just doesn't forgive me. She'll eventually come round. I mean, she loves the children, so she obviously must love me. She'll come around. She's just a little miffed. Everything will be fine. And on the flip side, Darya, in her head for the past 3 days, has been trying to figure out how to leave, how to take the children and leave. And she just knows that it is not possible for her to do that. Like, she's already struggling enough as it is in a household with two parents to feed the kids on time. There's five of them, and make sure that they are all taken care of. And she knows that it's going to be even more difficult if she leaves and goes to stay with her mom, or stay wherever. So that is something that is constantly going in her head. But she also knows that he is a complete stranger. Like, the person that she knows would never do this. And she's hurt and she feels betrayed and all of these things. And still, she loves him. And still, she loves him maybe even more than she did before. So it's so great that we're getting these characters so immediately, and how they are both very complex and very gray area and not just like one-sided. And mm, I'm liking it. I'm enjoying it. Irreconcilable differences. Yes, yes, yes. Marriage counseling is needed. We need some couples therapy. They clearly are having a hard time. And if they are both willing to work on it, this will do them well. Agreed. Agreed, agreed. Okay, they are very fleshed out characters and feel real. Yes. Yes. They don't feel like they are just made up people and how these made up people will react to a situation that they're put into, but they feel like they are people that are in this situation, and this is the thing that they're living through. Oof. Oof. I'm loving it. Me as their mediator. So tell me how you feel about that. No heroes, no villains. Yes. Everything is morally gray. Everything's ambiguous. I love it. I love it. Ooh. Ooh. Is this gonna be 5 stars for me? Like a 5-star read? I'm getting ahead of myself. I know. We are 2% into the book, and I'm already like, best book of 2024? Ooh, I'm loving this. Who knew? Who knew that Leo Tolstoy is a great writer? Wild. All right. Chapter 5. Stepan Arkadyevich had learned easily at school, thanks to his excellent abilities, but he had been idle and mischievous, and therefore was one of the lowest in his class. But in spite of his habitually dissipated mode of life, his inferior grade in the service, and his comparative youth, he occupied the honorable and lucrative position of president of one of the government boards at Moscow. This post he had received through his sister Anna's husband, Alexei Alexandrovich Karenin, who held one of the most important positions in the ministry to whose department the Moscow office belonged. But if Karenin had not got his brother-in-law this berth, then through 100 other personages, brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, and aunts, Stiva Oblonsky would have received this post, or some other similar one, together with the salary of 6,000, absolutely needful for him, as his affairs, in spite of his wife's considerable property, were in embarrassed condition. Half Moscow and Petersburg were friends and relations of Stepan Arkadyevich. He was born in the midst of those who had been and are the powerful ones of this world. 1/3 of the men in the government, the older men, had been friends of his father's and had known him in petticoats. Another third were his intimate chums, and the remainder were friendly acquaintances. Consequently, the distributors of earthly blessings in the shape of places, rents, shares, and such, were all his friends, and could not overlook one of their own set. And Oblonsky had no need to make any special exertion to get a lucrative post. He had only not to refuse things, not to show jealousy, not to be quarrelsome or take offense, all of which, from his characteristic good nature, he never did. It would have struck him as absurd if he had been told that he would not get a position with the salary he required, especially as he expected nothing out of the way. He only wanted what the men of his own age and standing did get, and he was no worse qualified for performing duties of the kind than any other man. Stepan Arkadyevitch was not merely liked by all who knew him for his good humor, but for his bright disposition and his unquestionable honesty. In him, in his handsome, radiant figure, his sparkling eyes, black hair and eyebrows, and the white and red of his face, there was something which produced a physical effect of kindliness and good humor on the people who met him. "Ah, Stiva! Oblonsky! Here he is!" was almost always said with a smile of delight on meeting him, even though it happened at times that after a conversation with him it seemed that nothing particularly delightful had happened. The next day, and the next, everyone was just as delighted at meeting him again. After filling for 3 years the post of president of one of the government boards at Moscow, Stepan Arkadyevitch had won the respect as well as the liking of his fellow officials, subordinates, and superiors, and all who had had business with him. The principal qualities in Stepan Arkadyevitch which had gained him this universal respect in the service consisted, in the first place, of his extreme indulgence for others, founded on a consciousness of his own shortcomings. Secondly, of his perfect liberalism, not the liberalism he read in the papers, but the liberalism that was in his blood, in virtue of which he treated all men perfectly equally and exactly the same, whatever their fortune or calling might be. And thirdly, the most important point, his complete indifference to the business in which he was engaged, in consequence of which he was never carried away and never made mistakes. On reaching the offices of the board, Stepan Arkadyevitch, escorted by a deferential porter with a portfolio, went into his little private room, put on his uniform, and went into the boardroom. The clerks and copyists all rose, greeting him with good-humored deference. Stepan Arkadyevitch moved quickly, as ever, to his place, shook hands with his colleagues, and sat down. He made a joke or two, and talked just as much as consistent with due decorum, and began work. No one knew better than Stepan Arkadyevitch how to hit on the exact line between freedom, simplicity, and official stiffness necessary for agreeable conduct of business. A secretary, with a good-humored deference common to everyone in Stepan Arkadyevitch's office, came up with papers, and began to speak in the familiar and easy tone which had been introduced to Stepan Arkadyevitch. "We have succeeded in getting the information from the government department of Penza. Here, would you care?" "You've got them at last," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, laying his finger on the paper. "Now, gentlemen," and the sitting of the board again. "If they knew," he thought, bending his head with a signified air as he listened to the report, "what a guilty little boy their president was half an hour ago." And his eyes were laughing during the reading of the report. Till 2 o'clock, the sitting would go on without a break, and at 2 o'clock there would be an interval and luncheon. It was not yet 2, when the large glass doors of the boardroom suddenly opened, and someone came in. All the officials, sitting on the further side under the portrait of the Tsar and the eagle, delighted at any distraction, looked round at the door. But the doorkeeper standing at the door at once drove out the intruder and closed the glass door after him. When the case had been read through, Stepan Arkadyevitch got up and stretched, and by way of tribute to the liberalism of the Times took out a cigarette in the boardroom and went into his private room. Two of the members of the board, the old veteran in the service, Nitkin, and the Kammerjunker, Greinovich, went in with him. "We shall have time to finish after lunch," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "To be sure, we will," said Nikitin. A pretty sharp fellow, this Fromen must be," said Greinovich, of one of the persons taking part in the case they were examining. Stepan Arkadyevitch frowned at Greinovich's words, giving him thereby to understand that it was improper to pass judgment prematurely, and made him no reply. "Who was that came in?" he asked the doorkeeper. "Someone, Your Excellency, crept in without permission directly my back was turned. He was asking for you. I told him, when the members come out, then—" "Where is he?" "He's gone into the passage. But here he comes anyway. That is he," said the doorkeeper, pointing to a strongly built, broad-shouldered man with a curly beard who, without taking off his sheepskin cap, was running lightly and rapidly up the worn steps of the stone staircase. One of the members going down, a lean official with a portfolio, stood out of his way and looked disapprovingly at the legs of the stranger, then glanced inquiringly at Oblonsky. Stepan Arkadyevitch was standing at the top of the stairs. His good-naturedly beaming face above the embroidered collar of his uniform beamed more than ever when he recognized the man coming up. "Why, it's actually you, Levin, at last," he said with a friendly, mocking smile, scanning Levin as he approached. "How is it you have deigned to look me up in this den?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch, and not content with shaking hands, he kissed his friend. "Have you been here long?" "I have just come, and very much wanted to see you," said Levin, looking shyly and at the same time angrily and uneasily around. "Well, let's go into my room," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, who knew his friend's sensitive and irritable shyness, and taking his arm, he drew him along as though guiding him through dangers. Stepan Arkadyevitch was on familiar terms with almost all his acquaintances, and called almost all of them by their Christian names: old men of 60, boys of 20, actors, ministers, merchants, and adjunct generals, so that many of his intimate chums were to be found at the extreme ends of the social ladder, and would have been very much surprised to learn that they had, through the medium of Oblonsky, something in common. He was the familiar friend of everyone with whom he took a glass of champagne, and he took a glass of champagne with everyone. And when, in consequence, he met any of his disreputable chums, as he used to joke and call many of his friends, in the presence of his subordinates, he well knew how, with his characteristic tact, to diminish the disagreeable impression made on them. Levin was not a disreputable chum, but Oblonsky, with his ready tact, felt that Levin fancied he might not care to show his intimacy with him before his subordinates, and so he made haste to take him off into his room. Levin was almost of the same age as Oblonsky. Their intimacy did not rest merely on champagne. Levin had been the friend and companion of his early youth. They were fond of one another in spite of the difference of their characters and tastes, as friends are fond of one another who have been together in early youth. But in spite of this, each of them, as is often the way with men who have selected careers of different kinds, though in discussion he would even justify the other's career, in his heart despised it. It seemed to each of them that the life he led himself was the only real life, and the life led by his friend was a mere phantasm. Oblonsky could not restrain a slight mocking smile at the sight of Levin. how often he had seen him come up to Moscow from the country where he was doing something, but what precisely Stepan Arkadyevitch could not quite make out, and indeed he took no interest in the matter. Levin arrived in Moscow, always excited and in a hurry, rather ill at ease and irritated by his own want of ease, and for the most part with a perfectly new, unexpected view of things. Stepan Arkadyevitch laughed at this, and liked it, in the same way Levin, in his heart, despised the town mode of life of his friend, and his official duties, which he laughed at, and regarded as trifling. But the difference was that Oblonsky, as he was doing the same as everyone did, laughed complacently and good-humoredly, while Levin laughed without complacency, and sometimes angrily. "We have long been expecting you," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, going into his room and letting Levin's hand go as though to show that here all danger was over. "I am very, very glad to see you," he went on. "Well, how are you? When did you come?" Levin was silent, looking at the unknown faces of Oblonsky's two companions, and especially at the hand of the elegant Grinovitch, which had such long white fingers, such long yellow filbert-shaped nails, and such huge shining studs on the shirt cuffs, that apparently they absorbed all his attention, and allowed him no freedom of thought. Oblonsky noticed this at once, and smiled. "Ah, to be sure. Let me introduce you," he said. "My colleagues, Philip Ivanitch Nikitin, Mikhail Stanislavitch Grinovitch." And turning to Levin, "A district councillor, a modern district councilman, a gymnast who lifts 13 stone with one hand, a cattle breeder and sportsman, and my friend Konstantin Dmitrievich Levin, and brother of Sergei Ivanovich Koznishev." "Delighted," said the veteran. "I have the honor of knowing your brother, Sergei Ivanovich," said Grinovitch, holding out his slender hand with its long nails. Levin frowned, shook hands coldly, and at once turned to Oblonsky, though he had a great respect for his half-brother, an author well known to all Russia. He could not endure it when people treated him not as Konstantin Levin, but as the brother of celebrated Koznishev. "No, I am no longer a district councillor. I have quarreled with them all, and don't go to the meetings anymore," he said, turning to Oblonsky. "You've been quick about it," said Oblonsky with a smile. "But how? Why?" "It's a long story. I will tell you sometime," said Levin, but he began telling him at once. "Well, to put it shortly, I was convinced that nothing was really done by the district councils, or ever could be," he began, as though someone had just insulted him. "On one hand, it's a plaything. They play at being a parliament, and I'm neither young enough nor old enough to find amusement in playthings. And on the other side," he stammered, "it's a means for the coterie of the district to make money. Formerly they had wardships, courts of justice. Now they have a district council, not in the form of bribes, but in the form of unearned salary," he said, as hotly as though someone of those present had opposed his opinion. "Aha! You're in a new phase again, I see. A conservative," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "However, we can go into that later. Yes, later. But I wanted to see you," said Levin, looking with hatred at Grinovitch's hand. Stepan Arkadyevitch gave a scarcely perceptible smile. "How was it you used to say you would never wear European dress again?" he said, scanning his new suit, obviously cut by a French tailor. "Ah, I see. A new phase." Levin suddenly blushed, not as grown men blush, slightly, without being themselves aware of it, but as boys blush, feeling that they are ridiculous through their shyness, and consequently ashamed of it, and blushing still more, almost to the point of tears. And if and it was so strange to see this sensible, manly face in such a childish plight that Oblonsky left off looking at him. "Oh, where shall we meet? You know I want very much to talk to you," said Levin. Oblonsky seemed to ponder. "I'll tell you what. Let's go to Gurin's to lunch, and there we can talk. I am free till 3. "No," answered Levin, after an instant's thought. "I have got to go on somewhere else." "All right then, let's dine together." "Dine together? But I have nothing very particular, only a few words to say, and a question I want to ask you, and we can have a talk afterwards." "Well, say the few words then, at once, and we'll gossip after dinner." "Well, that's it," said Levin, "but it's of no importance, though." His face all at once took an expression of anger from the effort he was making to surmount his shyness. "What are the Shtcherbatskoys doing? Everything as it used to be," he said. Stepan Arkadyevitch, who had long known that Levin was in love with his sister-in-law, Kitty, gave a hardly perceptible smile, and his eyes sparkled merrily. "You said a few words, but I can't answer in a few words, because... Excuse me a minute." A secretary came in, with respectful familiarity and the modest consciousness characteristic of every secretary of superiority to his chief in the knowledge of their business. He went up to Oblonsky with some papers and began, under pretense of asking a question, to explain some objection. Stepan Arkadyevitch, without hearing him out, laid his hand genially on the secretary's sleeve. "No, you do as I told you," he said, softening his words with a smile, and with a brief explanation of his view of the matter, he turned away from the papers and said, "So do it that way, if you please, Zahar Nikitich." The secretary retired in confusion. During the consultation with the secretary, Levin had completely recovered from his embarrassment. He was standing with his elbows on the back of the chair, and on his face was a look of ironical attention. "I don't understand it. I don't understand it," he said. "What don't you understand?" said Oblonsky, smiling as brightly as ever and picking up a cigarette. He expected some odd outburst from Levin. "I don't understand what you're doing," said Levin, shrugging his shoulders. "How can you do it seriously?" "Why not?" "Why, because there's nothing in it." "You think so, but we're overwhelmed with work. On paper, but there, you've a gift for it," added Levin. "That's to say, you think there's a lack of something in me?" "Perhaps so," said Levin, "but all the same I admire your grandeur, and am proud that I've a friend in such a great person. You've not answered my question, though," he went on with a desperate effort, looking Oblonsky straight in the face. "Oh, that's all very well. You wait a bit, and you'll come to this yourself. It's very nice for you to have over 6,000 acres in the Karazinsky district, and such muscles, and the freshness of a girl of 12. Still, you'll be one of us one day. Yes, as to your question, there is no change, but it's a pity you've been away so long." "Oh? Why so?" Levin queried, panic-stricken. "Oh, nothing," responded Oblonsky. "We'll talk it over. But what's brought you up to town?" "Oh, we'll talk about that too, later on," said Levin, reddening again up to his ears. "All right, I see," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "I should ask you to come to us, but my wife's not quite the thing. But I tell you what, if you want to see them, they're sure now to be at the Zoological Gardens from 4 to 5. Kitty skates. You drive along there, and I'll come and fetch you, and we'll go and dine somewhere together." "Capital. Goodbye till then. Now mind, you'll forget. I know you. Or rush off home to the country," Stepan Arkadyevitch called out, laughing. "No, truly." And Levin went out of the room. only when he was in the doorway, remembering that he had forgotten to take leave of Oblonsky's colleagues. That gentleman must be a man of great energy, said Grinovich, when Levin had gone away. Yes, my dear boy, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, nodding his head. He's a lucky fellow. Over 6,000 acres in the Karinsky district, everything before him, and what youth and vigor! Not like some of us. You have a great deal to complain of, haven't you, Stepan Arkadyevitch? Ah, yes. I'm in a poor way, a bad way, said Stepan Arkadyevitch with a heavy sigh. End of chapter 5. Okay, so chapter 4, we had the confrontation between Stepan and his wife, Daria, and now he is at work, and we know that he's not very outstanding. Like, and he never has been, like, academically. He was always the one who was, like, goofing off or, not really paying attention or whatever the case is. So he hasn't ever risen to the top of anything, but he is the president of some branch of government in Moscow because of connections that he's made. So he's not necessarily, like, the smartest person or the most savvy person, but he is also he is the type of person that people remember and enjoy being around. And he's like, I don't really know why, but here we are. So he's at work, they're in a meeting, and they're about to adjourn for the lunch portion of the meeting, and he gets notice that his friend is there, Levin, and Levin lives out in the country, and he doesn't know why he's here, and so he's like, hey, like, what's going on? And so, like, you know how when two adults get together and they try to, like, make plans and how it just doesn't really work out? That's kind of what happened for a bit, is them being like, yeah, I have a lot to tell you, but not now. And it's like, okay, do you want to do it now? Okay, what about now? How about you do this? And then we'll talk at this time. And they both have things to tell each other, but they also both don't really want to do it in public. Whatever Levin has to say, we don't know what it is. So, interesting. Interesting. But yeah, I'm liking it. I am enjoying the, like, tiny little details, the weird little details. It's nice. It is, like, painting a better picture of, like, the scene, which is really cool. Chapter 6. When Oblonsky asked Levin what had brought him to town, Levin blushed and was furious with himself for blushing because he could not answer. I have come to make your sister-in-law an offer, though that was precisely what he had come for. The families of the Levins and the Sherbatskoy were old, noble Moscow families, and had always been on intimate and friendly terms. This intimacy had grown still closer during Levin's student days. He had both prepared for the university with the young Prince Sherbatskoy, the brother of Kitty and Dolly, and had entered at the same time with him. In those days, Levin used often to be in the Sherbatskoys' house, and he was in love with the Sherbatskoy household. Strange as it may appear, it was with the household, the family, that Konstantin Levin was in love, especially with the feminine half of the household. Levin did not remember his own mother, and his only sister was older than he was, so that it was in the Sherbatskoys' house that he saw for the first time that inner life of an old, noble, cultivated, and honorable family of which he had been deprived by the death of his father and mother. All the members of that family, especially the feminine half, were pictured by him, as it were, wrapped about with a mysterious, poetical veil, and he not only perceived no defects whatever in them, but under the poetical veil that shrouded them he assumed the existence of the loftiest sentiments and every possible perfection. Why it was the three young ladies had one day to speak French and the next English, Why it was that at certain hours they played by turns on the piano, the sounds of which were audible in their brother's room above, where the students used to work. Why they were visited by those professors of French literature, of music, of drawing, of dancing. Why at certain hours all the three young ladies with Mademoiselle Linen drove in the coach of the Tversky Boulevard, dressed in their satin cloaks, Dolly in a long one, Natalia in a half-long one, and Kitty in one so short that her shapely legs in tightly drawn red stockings were visible to all beholders. Why it was that they had to walk about the Tversky Boulevard escorted by a footman with a gold cockade in his hat. All this and much more that was done in their mysterious world he did not understand, but he was sure that everything that was done there was done good, and he was in love precisely with the mystery of the proceedings. In his student days, he had all but been in love with the eldest, Dolly, but she soon married to Oblonsky, that he began being in love with the second. He felt, as it were, that he had to be in love with one of the sisters, only he could not quite make out which one. But Natalia, too, had hardly made her appearance in the world when she married the diplomat Livnov. Kitty was still a child when Levin left the university. Young Sherbatskoy went into the navy, was drowned in the Baltic, and Levin's relations with the Sherbatskoys was, in spite of his friendship with Oblonsky, became less intimate. But when early in the winter of this year Levin came to Moscow, after a year in the country, and saw the Sherbatskoys, he realized which of the three sisters he was indeed destined to love. One would have thought that nothing could be simpler than for him, a man of good family, rather rich than poor, and 32 years old, to make the young Princess Sherbatskaya an offer of marriage. In all likelihood, he would at once have been looked upon as a good match. But Levin was in love, and so it seemed to him that Kitty was so perfect in every respect that she was a creature far above everything earthly, and that he was a creature so low and so earthly that it could not even be conceived that other people and she herself could regard him as worthy of her. After spending 2 months in Moscow in a state of enchantment, seeing Kitty almost every day in society into which he went so as to meet her, he abruptly decided that it could not be, and went back to the country. Levin's conviction that it could not be was founded on the idea that in the eyes of her family he was a disadvantageous and worthless match for the charming Kitty, and that Kitty herself could not love him. In her family's eyes he had no ordinary, definite career and position in society, while his contemporaries by this time, when he was 32, were already one a colonel, and another a professor, another director of a bank and railways, or president of a board, like Oblonsky. But he knew very well how he must appear to others, was a country gentleman, occupied in breeding cattle, shooting game, and building barns. In other words, a fellow of no ability, who had not turned out well, and who was doing just what, according to the ideas of the world, is done by people fit for nothing else. The mysterious, enchanting Kitty herself could not love such an ugly person as he conceived himself to be, and, above all, such an ordinary, in no way striking person. Moreover, his attitude to Kitty in the past, the attitude of a grown-up person to a child, arising from his friendship with her brother, seemed to him yet another obstacle to love. An ugly, good-natured man, as he considered himself, might, he supposed, be liked as a friend, but to be loved with such a love as that with which he loved Kitty, one would need to be a handsome and, still more, a distinguished man. He had heard that women often did care for ugly and ordinary men, but he did not believe it, for he judged by himself, and he could not himself have loved any but beautiful, mysterious, and exceptional women. But after spending 2 months alone in the country, he was convinced that this was not one of those passions of which he had had experience in his early youth, that this feeling gave him not an instant's rest, that he could not live without deciding the question, would she or would she not be his wife, and that his despair had arisen only from his own imaginings, that he had no sort of proof that he would be rejected, and he had now come to Moscow with a firm determination to make an offer, and get married if he were accepted. Or he could not conceive what would become of him if he were rejected. End of chapter 6. Okay, so Levin has come to ask for, I guess, like, the blessings and to chat with Oblonsky about wanting to marry Kitty. So he grew up just like in awe of the Sherbatskoy's family, and so he like specifically just fell in love with like the feminine half of the family and was just so intrigued by all of the things that they did. They spoke French, they spoke English perfectly, they played the piano, they danced, they like knew how to do all of these things, and he just didn't understand why or how or anything like that. And so like he knew that he needed to love one of the sisters, but he didn't know which one. And then he like either decided or just that's just how it formed. I don't know. But now he wants to marry Kitty. And so that is why he's here and hoping that she will accept him, and doesn't know what he would do if he was denied. I don't like this man. No? Hmm. Really? Chapter 7. On arriving in Moscow by a morning train, Levin had put up at the house of his elder half-brother, Kaznishev. After changing his clothes, he went down to his brother's study, intending to talk to him at once about the object of his visit, and to ask his advice. But his brother was not alone. With him there was a well-known professor of philosophy, who had come from Kharkov expressly to clear up a difference that had arisen between them on a very important philosophical question. The professor was carrying on a hot crusade against materialists. Sergei Kaznishev had been following this crusade with interest, and after the reading the professor's last article, he had written him a letter stating his objections. He accused the professor of making too great concessions to the materialists, and the professor had promptly appeared to argue the matter out. The point in discussion was the question then in vogue. Is there a line to be drawn between psychological and physiological phenomena in men? And if so, where? Sergei Ivanovich met his brother with the smile of chilly friendliness he always had for everyone, and introducing him to the professor, went on with the conversation. A little man in spectacles, with a narrow forehead, tore himself from the discussion for an instant to greet Levin, and then went on talking without paying any further attention to him. Levin sat down to wait till the professor should go, but he soon began to get interested in the subject under discussion. Levin had come across the magazine articles about which they were disputing, and had read them, interested in them as a development for the first principles of science, familiar to him as a natural science student at the university. But he had never connected these scientific deductions as to the origin of man as an animal, as to reflex action, biology, and sociology, with those questions as to the meaning of life and death to himself, which had of late been more and more often in his mind. As he listened to his brother's argument with the professor, he noticed that they connected these scientific questions with those spiritual problems, that at times they almost touched on the latter, but every time they were close upon what seemed to him the chief point, they promptly beat a hasty retreat, and plunged again into a sea of subtle distinctions, reservations, quotations, allusions, and appeals to authorities, and it was with difficulty that he understood what they were talking about. "I cannot admit it," said Sergei Ivanovitch, with his habitual clearness, precision of expression, and elegance of phrase. "I cannot in any case agree with Kies that my whole conception of the external world has been derived from perceptions. The most fundamental idea, the idea of existence, has not been received by me through sensation. Indeed, there is no special sense organ for the transmission of such an idea." Yes, but they, Wirt and Naust and Pripasov, would answer that your consciousness of existence is derived from the conjunction of all your sensations, that consciousness of existence is the result of your sensations. Wirt, indeed, it says plainly that, assuming there are no sensations, it follows that there is no idea of existence. I maintain the contrary, began Sergei Ivanovitch. But here it seemed to Levin that just as they were close upon the real point of the matter, they were again retreating, and he made up his mind to put a question to the professor. "According to that, if my senses are annihilated, if my body is dead, I can have no existence of any sort?" he queried. The professor, in annoyance, and, as it were, mental suffering at the interruption, looked round at the strange inquirer, more like a bargeman than a philosopher, and turned his eyes upon Sergei Ivanovitch as though to ask, "What's one to say to him?" But Sergei Ivanovitch, who had been talking with far less heat and one-sidedness than the professor, and who had sufficient breadth of mind to answer the professor, and at the same time to comprehend the simple and natural point of view from which the question was put, smiled and said, "That question we have no right to answer, as of yet." "We have not the requisite data," chimed in the professor. And he went back to his argument. "No," he said, "I would point out the fact that if, as Pripasov directly asserts, perception is based on sensation, then we are bound to distinguish sharply between these two concepts." Levin listened no more, and simply waited for the professor to go. End of chapter 7. Did we catch all that? Are we like, yes, I understand. Yes. Yes. All right, so Levin has woken up and he's going to go and chat. However, he has found who he wants to talk to, already engaged in a discussion with a professor. And what they're talking about is almost convoluted to the point where Levin is unable to understand what he's saying. But because of his background, he is able to remember like his teachings and his book learnings, and so he is aware of the subject, and so he does pose a question because it seems like they're just almost arguing for the sake of arguing and not actually coming to a conclusion, and neither one of them are really changing their thoughts or their opinions. And so he asks a question, and the professor is like a little snippy and just like, ugh, how dare somebody enter this conversation and ask a question? How dare. But then Sergei Ivanovich, answers in good nature. And Levin is like, all right, well, I'm kind of bored of this discussion. And then so he like leaves and just waits for the professor to go in order for him to actually talk to Sergei Ivanovich, which is what he wanted to do to begin with. Once you get the professor going, there's no stopping him. That's what I've always said. Chapter 8. Last chapter for the day. When the professor had gone, Sergei Ivanovich turned to his brother. Delighted that you have come. For some time, is it? How's your farming getting on? Levin knew that his elder brother took little interest in farming, and only put the question in deference to him, and so he only took him about the sale of his wheat and money matters. Levin had meant to tell his brother of his determination to get married, and to ask his advice. He had indeed firmly resolved to do so. But after seeing his brother, listening to his conversation with the professor, hearing afterwards that unconsciously patronizing tone in which his brother questioned him about agricultural matters, their mother's property had not been divided, and Levin took charge of both their shares, Levin felt that he could not, for some reason, begin to talk to him of his intention of marrying. He felt that his brother would not look at it as he would have wished him to. Well, how is your district council doing? Asked Sergei Ivanovich, who was greatly interested in these local boards and attached great importance to them. I don't really know. What? Why, surely you're a member of the board. No, I'm not a member now. I've resigned, answered Levin, and I no longer attend the meetings. What a pity, commented Sergei Ivanovich, frowning. Levin, in self-defense, began to describe what took place in the meetings in his district. It's how it always is, Sergei Ivanovich interrupted him. We Russians are always like that. Perhaps it's our strong point, really, the faculty of seeing our own shortcomings. But we overdo it. We comfort ourselves with irony, which we always have on the tip of our tongues. All I say is, give such rights to our local self-government to any other European people. Why, the Germans or the English would have worked their way to freedom from them, while we simply turn them into ridicule. But how can it be helped? Said Levin penitently. It was my last effort, and I did try with all my soul. I can't. I'm no good at it. It's not that you're no good at it, said Sergei Ivanovich. It is that you don't look at it as you should. Perhaps not, Levin answered dejectedly. Oh, do you know brother Nikolai's turned up again? This brother, Nikolai, was the elder brother of Konstantin Levin and half-brother of Sergei Ivanovich, a man utterly ruined, who had dissipated the greater part of his fortune, was living in the strangest and lowest company, and had quarreled with his brothers. What did you say? Levin cried with horror. How do you know? Prokofy saw him in the streets. Here in Moscow? Where is he? Do you know? Levin got up from his chair as though on the point of starting off at once. I am sorry I told you, said Sergei Ivanovich, shaking his head at his younger brother's excitement. I sent to find out where he is living, and sent him his IOU to Trubin, which I paid. This is the answer he sent me. And Sergei Ivanovich took a note from under a paperweight and handed it to his brother. Levin read in the odd, familiar handwriting, I humbly beg you to leave me in peace. That's the only favor I ask of my gracious brothers. Nikolay Levin. Levin read it, and, without raising his head, stood with the note in his hands opposite Sergei Ivanovitch. There was a struggle in his heart between the desire to forget his unhappy brother for the time, and the consciousness that it would be base to do so. He obviously wants to offend me, pursued Sergei Ivanovitch, but he cannot offend me, and I should have wished with all my heart to assist him, but I know it's impossible to do that. Yes, yes, repeated Levin. I understand and appreciate your attitude to him, but I shall go and see him. If you want to, do, but I shouldn't advise it, said Sergei Ivanovitch. As regards myself, I have no fear of your doing so. He will not make you quarrel with me, but for your own sake, I should say you would do better not to go. You can't do him any good. Still, do as you please. Very likely I can't do any good, but I feel, especially at such a moment, that... But there's another thing. I feel I could not be at peace. Well, that I don't understand, said Sergei Ivanovitch. One thing I do understand, he added. It's a lesson in humility. I have come to look very differently and more charitably on what is called infamous since Brother Nikolay had become what he is. You know what he did. Oh, it's awful. Awful, repeated Levin, after obtaining his brother's address from Sergei Ivanovitch's footman. Levin was on the point of setting off at once to see him, but on second thought, he decided to put off his visit till evening. The first thing to do to set his heart at rest was to accomplish what he had come to Moscow for. From his brothers, Levin went to Oblonsky's office, and on getting news of the Sherbatskoys from him, he drove to the place where he had been told he might find Kitty. End of chapter 8. Okay, chapter 8. He being Levin, is going to tell Sergei about wanting to marry Kitty, but he gets interrupted and he doesn't really recover in order to actually tell Sergei Ivanovitch. Sergei Ivanovitch actually says oh, by the way, I heard from our brother, and the way that the brother had left the situation was in a big fight, and he is the half brother of Sergei, but actual brother of Levin. I think if I'm remembering that correctly. But Sergei asked around for him to try and find him because he just kind of disappeared after the fight, and got a message back from the brother that basically said, "Stop looking for me." And so Levin is just all in a huff and a fluster, and he's like, "I'm gonna find him. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna look for him." And Sergei is just really relaxed and just maybe you don't need to do that. That's okay. That's fine. Oof, but I am enjoying it. I'm liking this. I'm enjoying Leo Tolstoy's writing style. Finding the little details in different scenes and makes it just seem more real than something that he just made up in his head. Same with the characters. They're all pretty dynamic instead of just one-sided and just kind of flat. They all have substance to them, which is really exciting. Even the minor characters seem to have substance to them, which is really cool. Yeah, we definitely need to get a flowchart going. Absolutely, absolutely. And to show how everybody's interconnected and everything. I feel like it will get a little a little convoluted, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, maybe the way that Tolstoy is writing is it's going to be perfect in that we will be able to have very distinct associations with each of the character, which would be nice. But also, it's not 100% necessary for it to still be enjoyable. I mean, Garcia Marquez is a little muddled with the characters, and His writing's amazing. Um, but yeah, I'm liking it, which is great because this book is really long. If we weren't liking it already, we would be having a problem. But that is going to be it for me today. But it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you. And I 1000% appreciate your support. All right, have a good one, everyone.